I am really excited about this project. When I became pregnant with my daughter, it became a huge excuse for me to sew really cute little kids' clothes. And I don't really have much experience really sewing kids' clothes. I've never been a kid person. Kids' clothes was not something that I studied in school. So it was kind of a fun project for me to pick up after I became pregnant and had a reason to sew kids' clothes. So naturally, as Isabel's gotten a little bit older and gotten out of diapers, thank goodness, she needed underwear. And being a lingerie designer, I of course decided that I was going to make her her own underwear. And so that is what I'm showing you today. I'm releasing a new pattern. It's called the Belle Big Girl Underwear. It's a basic kind of bikini cut underwear pattern and camisole, which can be worn as just a regular tank top or an undershirt. It's super simple to sew. It's small pieces, so it's great for using up little bits and pieces of fabric that you've got around. And if your household is anything like my household, we go through a lot of underwear. So being able to make your own is really, really awesome. And you can use all these cool prints like these ones that I bought from Spoonflower. I think it's a Crystal Whalen print. So yeah, I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to show you how to make these. So I've cut my pieces out of this cotton lycra jersey. This is my front and my back. And if you've sewn the Celeste underwear pattern or my Zoe underwear or Zoe bikini bottom pattern, these pieces will probably look pretty familiar because it's a very similar style, just a little bit more coverage. And instead of using cotton, like a separate cotton lining, I've just cut out my gusset lining out of the same fabric, just because it's kind of fun to have a printed lining. So if you've sewn underwear before, there's really no difference between sewing kids underwear and sewing grown-up underwear. The only one thing I did want to mention is that if your kid is still just potty training and maybe isn't quite as great at using the potty every time they need to, it might be a good idea to use this PUL fabric. It's the type of fabric that like cloth diapers are made out of. It's water repellent, but it's still fairly breathable and it's really lightweight. So I know when Isabel was first potty training, she's going to love me telling you this, I would just back the gusset lining with a piece of this PUL fabric and then just make my underwear as normal. And that way they have just a little bit of extra protection against any potential accidents. Okay, so starting the basic construction of these underwear is really simple. I'm going to start by just finishing this cut edge of my gusset lining. I'm going to use my serger. If you don't have a serger, you can zigzag stitch this or you can just leave it as is. So now that that's done, we can assemble the gusset seam. So I'm going to start by taking my panties front, right side facing up, and I'm working on this curved gusset seam. I'm going to place my panties back along here, and you're easing two opposite curves together, so it can be a little bit tricky. You might want to pin the heck out of it, or you can baste it together. I'm just going to go ahead and really quickly baste it. One other thing to note about this pattern is it has a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, so those are basted together. And now I can take my gusset lining and with the right side of my gusset lining facing the wrong side of my panties back, I'm going to, you can pin this along here, this curved seam, or you can just go ahead and sew it together. I'm going to run it through my serger really quick. So now that that seam is sewn, when you flip your gusset lining up, so you have a nice encased seam here now once you flip your gusset lining up. So from here, you can just baste along here, or you can pin, or just make sure that your lining is pressed up towards your panties front. And from here, we're going to finish the leg line with fold over elastic. So I'm starting sewing my fold over elastic onto the wrong side of my fabric. I'm just starting at the open hip seam along the leg line. So I've got my elastic placed shiny side up. And the goal is to get this cut edge of your underwear to run alongside the fold line. But don't worry if you're not too precise. I know I am not the absolute most precise when I do this, because you can just trim it back when you're done. Just do a little zigzag back tack to anchor it on. And as you're zigzag stitching it on, you're pulling on the elastic. So there's our first leg line done, and you can start on the opposite side now. So here they are with the elastic sewn around to each leg line. You can see on the right side I've got quite a bit of overhang here of my fabric, so I'm just going to trim this back as close to my stitching line as possible. And then from here we just fold our elastic along the fold line. And still using our zigzag stitch, we're going to top stitch this down. So there we go. Our leg lines are both bound in elastic now. So if you've sewn underwear with me before, you'll probably be able to guess the next steps. But we're going to sew one side seam. So, and then we're going to finish the waistline. So the most important thing here is that when you're sewing your side seams, that the edges of the elastic butt up evenly, so that when you open this up, the elastic looks continuous. So you can pin it, you can do a couple of hand stitches in it, whatever you need to do to get a nice neat edge. Do a little back and forth. And let's see how I did here. I'm feeling pretty good about this one. So when I open this up, there, that looks pretty good. So I'm going to finish this with a serger, and then I'm going to finish my waist edge with my fold over elastic. So here we go. These are really starting to look like a pair of really cute underwear at this point. So now I'm ready to put my fold over elastic around the waist edge. And this is just like what we did with our leg lines. It's exactly the same. So starting on that open side seam, working on the wrong side of our fabric or the inside of the garment, using a zigzag stitch. I'm going to sew this all the way around. So again, just a reminder, you're pulling on the elastic, not the fabric. Trim back your excess fabric. So one thing to note about sewing kids underwear, or at least this kids underwear pattern, I do tend to pull a little bit tighter on my elastic. Just creates a little bit of a snugger fit, or a more snug fit. I'm a firm believer that applying elastic is a little bit, just you get the feel of it. And different people like a different snugness. We are on to our second from last step. We're just going to sew up our side seam really quick. So similar to our first step, make sure that the edges of your elastic are butting up against one another evenly. I'm going to stick a little pin in here. And then again at the bottom as well. So where it meets at that 3/8 seam allowance mark, that's where you want to make sure that your elastic edges are joining up. So I always pretty much use my sewing machine to sew my seam first and then finish it with my serger, just because I want to make sure I get a nice join here. And the moment of truth, how did I do? Not too bad. It's not perfect, but it's good enough. Good enough for my kid. So finish this with your serger or zigzag stitch, or however you like to finish your seams. And then we're just going to tack down our seam allowances. Oh my goodness, these are so adorable. So we're almost done. It's just the finishing touches now. The way that I like to finish my joins is to just kind of flip back my threads, pull them back, push my seam allowance towards the back of the garment, and then I just do a couple of stitches on my sewing machine, just a straight stitch, and I just tack the seam allowance down. So this creates a nice secure join. It also secures your serger threads. So I just do that to all of my joins. Trim back all your threads. And you're basically done. The best part about sewing for kids is they're usually not terribly picky about how perfectly you sew things. So if you're kind of speeding through them and maybe things aren't quite as perfect as you'd normally like it, it probably won't matter if your kid is anything like mine. right. There we go. An adorable pair of kids' underwear. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching.